The Fight for Democracy. Was It Worth It? By Adam Pavlakovic. The 1980s. For some parts of the world, like in the United States of America, it was a fun time to be alive. Rock and roll, pop music, Star Wars, and video games were all some of the new and exciting bits of media that had everyone up and about, ready to have fun. There was little to worry about, and life was overall pretty good for the general population. Unfortunately, the rest of the world didn't experience as much prosperity as the United States did during the 1980s. In Korea, political turmoil plagued the nation as the government, in its efforts to contain communism once and for all, paid very little regard to its citizens and their basic human rights. As the people fought for a democratic style of government, the government fought the supposed communists from the north. The main problem with this was that the supposed communists were supposedly hidden among the South Korean citizens, so anyone who got in the way of the government would be considered one of the commies. So what led to all this national trauma in South Korea during the 80s? After 18 years of dictatorship, President Park Chung-hee was assassinated in the Blue House by the director of the KCIA, Kim Jae-kyu. This led to a military takeover of the government and a change in attitude among the citizens. The people had had enough and demanded a democratic reform in their government. After the military power under Chun Doo-hwan had gone about drastic means of suppression, including closing the universities and shutting down protests, about 200 students gathered at the closed Chonam National University to protest martial law and the limits it had been placing on their freedoms. The government responded by sending in troops, and it did not take long for chaos to take over. The day was May 18th, 1980, and for the next 10 days, there would be what is known as the Gwangju Uprising. The uprising in Gwangju involved an abundance of violence, militia confiscating government vehicles and weapons to fight in the streets, unnecessary suffering by the innocent, and has planted nightmarish memories in the minds of thousands, if not millions, of Koreans. It is a deep scar on Korean history, and despite treacherous attempts by the government to distort the truth of the event, it was far too impactful to be covered up and forgotten. The years following the Gwangju Uprising were not quite as historically active as the massacre in Gwangju, but the democratic movement had certainly not died. What the people needed was a catalyst to get them out and protesting in the streets. In 1987, the people got the call to action they needed. The announcement of a continued indirect election where the current president picks the next sparked outrage among the citizens of Korea. On top of that, the Catholic Priests Association for Justice released the previously covered up information about the death of Park Jong-chol, who had been killed during torture carried out by the government in the name of anti-communism. What further elevated matters was the death of Lee Han-yeol during a democratic protest. He became a rallying point for the democratic movement at its peak, and millions attended his funeral. Having been such monumental events in Korean history, numerous forms of media have been produced about the Gwangju Massacre and the June struggle. The film, 1987, When the Day Comes, portrays the full events of the June struggle, from the efforts of the Catholic Priests Association for Justice to what the average university student experience might have been like at the end. I personally found this film to be very educational, extremely engaging, and all around very well made. One of the major focuses on the film was the unauthorized recording and transfer of information by one of the guards at the prison holding the people involved in the torture of Park Jong-chol. This part of the movie highlights the feeling of courage and fear that the prison guard experienced in trying to do the right thing, and helps the audience to understand the amount of emotional and physical trauma he had to suffer in the name of democracy. The movie also highlighted the experience of his niece, who was entering university. It focused on her character transforming from someone who wanted to stay out of trouble to a patriot who cared deeply about the rebellion. I thought it was a very good decision to include her character in the movie because her character arc was representative of many South Koreans who experienced a similar transition in their own lives. The documentary Kim Gun, made in 2019, features real survivors of the Gwangju massacre and lets them share their experiences. Hearing about the brutal torture the government enacted against its own citizens and the depressing outlook of the citizens who lost loved ones leaves the viewer with a lasting sense of injustice. The film successfully touches the hearts of its viewers and accomplishes what it set out to do, to make sure the uprising of Gwangju goes unforgotten and to remind the people of the true degree of suffering that was endured that kept the movement alive when it was most needed. An important question to consider when talking about serious and political freedom movements like the June struggle and the Gwangju uprising is if it was worth the pain and suffering endured by the people. The best way to answer the question would be to analyze their goals and see how well they accomplished them. The people wanted direct elections and an end to the government brutality against its citizens. In the end, the people did achieve their goals and the nation did improve. So it would appear that their efforts were worth the suffering, though of course, it's easy to say the pain and suffering of others was worth being endured from an outside perspective like mine. Although the nation did adopt direct elections and minimize the hunt for people with connection to communism in the North, it was by no means immediate. Fortunately, time has gone on long enough to bring us to today, where the brutality and suppression have died down and the nation is much better than it once was. So, how is South Korea doing today? Despite the intense struggles it faced in the past regarding the Gwangju uprising, June struggle, and other events, South Korea has prevailed as a democracy in the first world. The current president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, has recognized the brave efforts of those who died during the movements, stating that they believed that the survivors would manage to open up a better world. They were convinced that the defeat of the day would become the victory of tomorrow. There is truth in what he says, because a better world has indeed opened up, and the attitude of the government has completely changed from what it used to be. President Moon has not only acknowledged what went ignored for so long, but has even launched an investigation into finding who is responsible for sending in the military against the protesting citizens. He says that the objective is not necessarily just to legally punish those who are responsible, but because the basis of truth is necessary in order to find the true path toward reconciliation and unity. President Moon is making the right decision here for multiple reasons. For one, he is reassuring the people of the nation of South Korea that he stands with democracy and justice. He is also doing what is owed, at the very least, to the heroes of the 1980s, enforcing the notion that it is more important to stand up for what is right than to blindly stand behind what the authority does. Because of the sacrifices of those in the past, South Korea is a much stronger nation than ever before and stands as a symbol of democratic victory for the rest of the world to see. With all these things considered, that being the change in voting policy, leadership, attitude, and national atmosphere, I would certainly argue that the sacrifices of the people who fought against the government were not in vain. Though no citizen should fear for their life by standing up and speaking out against their government, their fear of death and pain was overpowered by their love for their country and a burning desire to make it better for the next generations. South Koreans today, however, are still not quite satisfied with how their government is run. According to Pew Research Center, a little over half of Koreans in 2019 had a pessimistic outlook on their elected officials and their agendas. Despite these statistics, I'm sure that South Korea much prefers today's government to its former self that was led by martial dictatorship. If anything, these statistics prove that South Koreans are always trying to improve their government and that they value continuous progress in making the country the best that it could be. As President Moon reminds the people of the government's change in attitude toward those who loved their country in the past, and as filmmakers replenish the citizens' emotional fury for justice, there is hope to be had that the nation will keep improving as it was always meant to do so. Thank you for watching.